Welcome back to the Other Side Lifestyle Podcast with Jim and Aram. Today, we have Steven Skrenta, a man who has changed his entire life around to be able to serve his community and the country at large with real food. And today, you're going to get questions answered about how do I find well-sourced meats and other things in your area, what questions to ask. He's going to take away all the intimidation and the fear for anybody who is looking to learn more about where their food is coming from. He is the owner of Let's Smoke Chronic Farms. I said it wrong. Acabonac Farms, different farm, different kind of farming he's doing.
Close.
He's going to tell us what Acabonac means. And we're going to find out a little bit of his transition professionally and how he got into this world of farming. Because you didn't grow up as a farmer, did you?
No, guys, it's nice to meet you both. Thank you for having me. Yeah, no, I didn't. We say that my parents struggled to allow us to have a dog growing up. So this is sort of latent sort of interest in what I was not allowed to do necessarily growing up.
Not allowed to play with animals. Now your whole life revolves around playing with them and then providing them as fuel for humans.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about your background. What you did? What did you do before farming? How did you get into this? How did you learn about it? What made you pull the trigger with it?
Well, so I was born and raised on Long Island, which is where we farm now. And
where in Long Island are you?
Well, right now I'm sitting in a town called Middle Island, which is about 20 minutes west of Riverhead. And I grew up in Smithtown, and then when I was younger, Seaford, so Suffolk and Nassau County. And I studied business in college and went to work in finance after I graduated.
And you went to UPenn.
I graduated from
which
UPenn, yeah.
Is the home.
Shit.
Aram's going to love this. Is the home of my favorite band, the Disco Biscuits. He hates when I reference that band. They're on fire lately. Go check them out. Anyway, they produce a lot of great things. They produce the Disco Biscuits and Steven Skrenta.
The business school at UPenn is second to none.
Top notch.
Yeah, and I graduated there as an undergrad, and then went and started my career in New York City. And then
were you trading?
So to help me pay for college, I actually worked on the floor of the Philadelphia Stock Exchange, which doesn't exist as much, perhaps at all. I'm not even sure today. But it was an options trading floor when I was there, and I was what was called a runner, which I thought was really very, very exciting. And I loved it. But I moved, so I went into a different sort of part of finance when I graduated. And I worked in New York City for a bunch of years. And then half of my career was in London. So my family and I, we lived in London for, close to 9 years or so. And became a UK citizen while there, which is great, and my youngest son was born there, so it was a lot of fun.
He's got dual citizenship. That's cool.
Yeah. So it was kind of neat. It was a great experience, and again, it's like we occasionally when I was young we would take a vacation to the Caribbean, but we weren't traveling around Europe as a family, and so it was always an interest of mine, and having a chance to live and work there was dynamite.
That's awesome. My dad actually spent not 9 years, 6 months there for work. So I got to spend a little bit of time out there. That's such a cool experience.
Yeah, I don't tell many, because I'm a New Yorker, so obviously the best city in the world is New York City, but actually I think it's London. I mean, it's just a fantastic place to live and to go out and to have fun. And it's great fun.
I love it. I love it there. Yeah, I spent like a good month there, and then I had a couple other little trips. I think it's great. I think it's such a cool spot. So how many years then were you total in the business world?
About a little less than 20.
Okay. And then were you back here in the States when you decided to transition to what you're doing now, or were you over there and started this thought process?
Yeah. So my wife, perhaps similar to your family situations told me that it was time to move back to the States.
Okay.
And so that's what we did. And, we had a house out east on, eastern Long Island. Okay. And I asked where we were going to raise the kids. They were young at the time, and she said, we want to raise them on the beach in Amagansett, which is where we live. And I said, nobody lives in Amagansett year round, right? It's a place you go to in the summer. And okay. we gave it a shot one Christmas. We spent a few weeks out there. It's just great. It's just a great place to live year round and raise the kids, and it's right on the beach, and it's sort of perfect. So that's what we did, and before long, my wife said, like, she can't stand me being around. Like, I've got to get a job.
So you're kind of like retired at this point. Came back. Did you officially consider yourself retired, or you're like, yeah, I'm just gonna okay.
Yeah,
you're like, I'm done with this business.
No, I mean, I loved it. I mean, I still love it today. The issue is that, you really do need to be in New York City or, London in order to do it. And commuting from, the Hamptons. And I didn't want to come back and live in the city again. Yeah. So then while still in Europe, about things to do. And it's funny, I was preparing to present at a board meeting for a company that I was working with, and I was listening to the news in the background, as I always do, and it's Bloomberg, and they were talking about Chipotle, and I had never heard of Chipotle, right? Because I was living in, it was a long time ago, and I was living in London, and they didn't exist there. They had a problem with their earnings because they couldn't sustain enough, or they couldn't source enough sustainable pork.
Okay.
And like, to me, maybe that doesn't sound like much, but to me, it just like knocked my socks off because.
How is this a problem? Yeah.
Yeah, because I just picture myself going into McDonald's, for instance, and ordering a Big Mac, and then the person telling me, we can't serve you a Big Mac today, which never would happen. And never would happen. And then if I asked why, they said because we couldn't source enough sustainably grown beef. And I thought, a fast food restaurant, like, I couldn't put it together. And so we then started doing some research on what that all meant. And that was my first.
That's a Rom's freaking mute your thing, your freaking dogs. This freaking guy, he loves animals. We'll talk about his trying to find an apartment with dogs in a minute. What was I going to say? Explain when we hear phrases like sustainably raised meat. Yeah. Is there another version? What does that mean for that kind of a company, or for anybody for that matter?
It's loosey-goosey, I'd say. It's really, it's when you get into labeling laws in the U.S., it's really a challenge to define it. I mean, what people think it means versus what it probably technically means is something very. Well, when we first started the business, we were deciding whether or not we were going to become certified organic. And I remember looking and finding that you could buy organic Twinkies.
It's such a I love this topic so that people can understand how labeling borderline means nothing at this point, and which words do matter, and that's and
it's really interesting because because if you appreciate how these labels can easily become bastardized, right? I mean, there are big companies that are pushing their ways into trying to get a bigger premium for their products. And if they need to, develop and then squeeze through loopholes, that they will do it. Oh, yeah. And then you get an organic Twinkie. And then we have, lots of people call and say, are you certified organic? And I wish there was a quick way to say, no, we're better, but there's not. Like, you actually have to go through the discussion. And most people, I would say the majority of people just still want the organic label, right? Yeah. But they're surprised to learn that you can use herbicides and pesticides. They're surprised to learn that you can use, synthetic fertilizers. They all need to be organic, but again, what does that mean?
It reminds me of Tommy Boy. The customer wants to see the guarantee. He's like, yeah, I could take a shit in a box and put a guarantee that you're getting a guaranteed piece of shit. Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's exactly what this sounds like. The customer just wants to see these words that make them feel good. and they don't even know what they mean. How would you, if there's like a Reader's Digest version, I guess, how do you explain that? Or when they say, are you certified organic? Do you sometimes just go, no, we're not? Or do you always explain it? And how do you explain it?
Well, I have to say no, because we're not. And then
I don't know if you would just end at that point, though. No, we're not. Bye.
I guess it really depends on the time you catch me, right? But if I sense that the customer, the potential customer, wants to engage on the topic, then I properly engage, right? So, and I think it's easiest to explain maybe the differences between regenerative, which is what we strive to be, versus organic.
Because I feel like when people hear sustainable, they probably think regenerative.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, sustainable, I would assume, is just, hey, we can keep making beef however we make it.
Well, that's another question I also ask when we do these pasture tours. I often ask the customers how they define sustainable.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm not even sure. I mean, there's not a uniform sort of definition for that either. Right. It's a bit loosey goosey. And so you say, I can more easily get my head around regenerative. Right.
Yeah.
Because you could say there are our protocols are built to first and foremost prioritize building soil health, right?
So that's the essence of regenerative.
That's
right?
regenerative.
For us it is, right? Yeah, because I think, at least when we started thinking about the business and peeling back the onion around the question of where does health come from, our conclusion was a big part of that is going to be soil health. And I know that's sort of abstract right now, but maybe if we have time to go through it, that's something that I think is really important to environmental health, to human health, to animal health. And it does start from the ground up, right? You do need that as a foundation.
Well, I mean, that's the essence of the ecosystem. There's a reason why you can't inhabit certain parts of Japan still, because of that little bomb that we dropped in 45. Like, that shit actually lives in the soil. We have to have all of that taken care of. And when people are like, well, it's organic and it's grown on an organic farm, you have no idea what was in that soil 30 years ago that's still living in it. So I don't care.
That's true.
And I think
that's true.
But to go through these mental gymnastics of like, well, I'm not going to pay attention to calories as long as all my food is organic and sustainably or whatever sourced, you're missing the forest for the trees. And I think most people don't have the luxury to actually think that way, because is it more expensive to buy grass-fed, grass-finished beef? Of course it is. Is it more expensive to buy organic vegetables? Yeah. But at the end of the day, if you had no other choice, which most people really don't have much of a choice, because a lot of times they are bound financially, get whatever you can get. You're not the one controlling it either way, regardless.
Mm-hmm.
You actually enlightened me just in our conversation before doing that. There's like, we gotta focus. There's like a few different things I want to hear about, because you just mentioned the grass fed, and Steve, we had a conversation before scheduling this, and you had enlightened me about what even grass fed, how that might not quite be what we think. But let's organize. Well, should we talk about the regenerative soil and the importance of that and what that means and what that looks like?
Let's go ground up. Let's go ground up. So we'll talk about soil. We'll talk about non-GMO organic vegetables and the nutrient factors of that, and then we'll talk about animal production and that. And I think that should be a good way to paint a nice picture for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll try to say a few things that are not controversial in the beginning. How's that? So just to kind of
as much controversy as you can open up, please, because I love it.
Whatever you want.
The idea that you are what you eat, right, should not be very controversial, I think, right? So
it's common sense.
Our grandma taught us that, our parents, sort of taught us, and so what we eat matters to our health, and that doesn't necessarily need to mean a label, right? Whole foods and the right balance of proteins and carb, et cetera. We're just transferring value from our food into our bodies, right? It's sort of simple. And so if you're eating an organic Twinkie and that's all you're eating, and it's good because it's organic, then you're going to realize that you probably made a mistake.
Ingredients are from farm to table. The ingredients in that Twinkie are from farm to box.
Yeah. So it matters what we. So I'm looking at you, Jim, and you're in a gym, and I can So we get it, right? So we are what we eat, and that's important. And so you can say we should extend that to the diet of what we eat, right? And so we could go to a cow, a beef, and say, if that beef is eating McDonald's 3 times a day, right, and not getting exercise and not getting fresh air and clean water, then its health is going to be compromised because it is what it eats, right? So now we're one iteration past us, but it still holds. And what most people don't do is go the next iteration, which is, so if you're a cow and you're having this discussion just like we are, and you're saying, well, you are what you eat, and it matters, right? Then you care about the forage, right? You care about your diet.
Yeah.
So what is the nutrient density of the forage, the grasses and the legumes and the weeds that it's eating, or the grain ration that it's been given in a feedlot, matters to its health, right? The nutrient density of its food is going to matter. And then this is where I'm going to lose everybody, right? Because you can go one iteration further, which is if you're a bunch of forages talking. Now, this sounds crazy.
I like it.
But this is going to answer a lot of questions, I think, if you just think this way. Like if you just, what are the forages? Where's the value of what the forages are taking up in? And that's coming from the soil. And you really can't iterate past that. And so if you say that's basically the foundation, and then you think, okay, well, what's growing our food in America today? Is it the soil? Is it the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that are in the soil growing the carrots, or the forages that are feeding the cattle? Or is it bags of synthetic fertilizer?
Yeah. I think I don't know what the percentage is. Maybe one of you guys know the percentage of the micronutrients in your typical fruit, vegetable, the percentage drop that they have from, say, we'll call it 100 years ago, that there's a massive drop in the amount of nutrients. Not to say don't eat them, you're still getting some, but not what it once was. The soil matters.
So they're empty calories, right? Because the way in which it was produced absolutely matters. So at Acabonac Farms, what we try to do is we say, we're going to prioritize soil health. So that's number one. It's much more important than profitability. It's much more important than the animals that we select on top of the soil. It's the most important. Why? Because if you get that right, most of the other things fall into place. And so what would you rather have? Would you rather have a carrot that was grown entirely unassisted by the value in the soil? Or would you rather the carrot, it could be an organic carrot, that was grown largely by synthetic fertilizers that were put in the soil that grew the carrot? Like, there's a difference, and it goes to nutrient density in that carrot or beef, whatever it is. And so you say, if I'm going to pay a premium, if I'm going to pay a 30 or 40% premium for the carrot or the steak, whatever it may be, I better make sure that it's got as much nutrient value as it possibly can. If I want that, it needs to come from highly functional, healthy soil. And it's that simple. So where do farms get their fertility from? It's a key question that I think if you're in a position where you can afford it, right, and you can take the time to think through it, that's the question really to ask. What's growing my food?
It's almost like, can you afford not to prioritize this at the end of the day as well? I think it's if people really did an inventory of where they spent their money. If, again, this is all under the premise if health is a priority. I mean, the amount that they might spend on alcohol or dining out, the amount they spend on cable and internet and apps and all these things. And then they want to say, hey, health is a priority, but it's too expensive to get that kind of stuff. Like you're already making it clear that health is not a priority if you're spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not $1,000 or more on things that are messing your health up.
And I'd argue that you're going to spend it regardless because, if you choose not to and you're ingesting these empty calories, you're going to spend it in terms of lack of quality of life. You're going to spend it on healthcare. You're going to spend it in environmental issues. Lots of different costs that we don't put into the price of food that absolutely does exist. And we're seeing it today more and more.
So this could be a good part, and we can even do this at each topic that comes up. if somebody is looking at local farms and knowing everything that you just said, what would be the first question that somebody should be asking this local farm in regards to their soil? How can they weed through and find, okay, this is a legit, they're not just saying these words, they legit are being ethical, they're valuing the soil, they're being truly regenerative?
Well, what I say is, so I'm not going to give you, I'll give you the way to think about it, right? Okay. Because there's an infinite number of ways that you can ask this question, and there's lots of different things that you'll see if you're going and visiting your local farm or farmers. So think of farming as like your bank account. It's simple. Like we all know what happens there. So there are deposits, like your paychecks going in every, twice a month or every week or whatever it is, and there are withdrawals, right? So you're, spending money, you're taking cash out of the ATM, whatever it is. And the same thing goes for the farm soil and its fertility. So where are the deposits coming from? And they could be coming from bags of synthetic fertilizer. They could be coming from a big composting operation. They could be coming from the presence of livestock and the grazing action and the manure and the urine that's being added to the soil, right? And where are the withdrawals coming from? What our withdrawals are when we take cattle or lamb or pigs off the farm and bring them to slaughter, right? We're extracting minerals and nutrients off the farm. If you're growing vegetables, it could be how many times you're harvesting those carrots a year, how many veggie cycles are you running a year. Those are withdrawals. And if you're making more withdrawals than you are deposits, you go bankrupt. And that's what you need to watch out for. And so it's simply when you go to the farm or when you're thinking of researching a brand, you want to understand the conditions that the food is being grown under, and you're thinking about deposits and withdrawals. So do they have livestock walking around? Because before World War II, most of the small local farms in the United States were integrated, meaning they had livestock, they had cash crops, they had fruits, they had vegetables, things like that. And those cycles and how they work together and the fertility that, that provided allowed for you to keep the chemicals out. Mm-hmm. But when you separate, some of those things into, thousands of acres of, say, just corn, you need to put fertility in, because your withdrawals, you're harvesting, throughout the year. When you start dealing with functionally bankrupt soil, you're susceptible to things like pests. You're susceptible to things like invasive, weeds that overpower your crops. So you then need to use herbicides and pesticides, right? Or non-GMO seeds that are resistant to those herbicides and pesticides. So once your withdrawals are greater than your deposits, you then need to start asking more questions, right? Yeah. Because that's where you're going to run into issues with, quality of food and residual issues of Roundup and all the other stuff that we use in the United States. It's true.
How could I find out, or how do I know what their withdrawals are compared to deposits?
If you're you can see, right? You can go. Step one is, can you engage with the farmer, right? Yeah. Can you ring them on the phone? Can you ask? Do they have time for you? Can you go visit the farm? Are they going to take the time to really answer your questions?
Okay.
So if you're going to pay a 40% premium for the products, you'd hope that that's the case.
Yeah.
A simple question is, how many cycles of veggies do you run here every year?
Okay.
Right. And, how often do you plow and till your fields? Because when you do that, right, you're destroying soil health.
So what would be like a good number in terms of how often is plowing, how many cycles?
We don't raise vegetables, but it would be more around, where you're getting your fertility, right? If they have a big composting operation, or they're resting certain sections of their farm, right, every year, and they're rotating that resting, then maybe the number of veggie cycles that they can run are much higher than if not, right?
So it could be depending on how much land they have and then how often they're rotating their fields, kind of a thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Stephen,
these are some of the questions that get you to regenerative. Sorry.
Yeah.
So when it comes down to the standardization of this stuff and the kind of the governing bodies that are actually monitoring and establishing these standards, who are the governing body? I mean, obviously everybody knows who the FDA is, but outside of that, the people that are allowing non-GMO or organic or grass-fed or anything, who are these labels actually being governed by?
Well, I mean, most of the time in the U.S. it's USDA, right? Okay. But I would say, you need to, again, the level of engagement is important, right? You need to be your own advocate. So similar to if you got sick and you said, I want to go to, the best hospital that I can, right? Let's say it's in Philadelphia, the University of Pennsylvania, or, it's Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York or something like that. Even still, if you're going to a really spectacular place, you want to be your own advocate. You want to ask the questions. You want to be engaged with the information, because the truth is we're all humans and we make mistakes, and sometimes we're focused on other things, and sometimes things slip through the cracks, and sometimes we're not monitored as often or as much as we should be, right? And so, again, we're talking about your health, and we're talking about paying a premium for these products. So engage with it. And so I'd say, is it important that the USDA exists? Yes, absolutely. FDA, absolutely. Yes, it is. Should that be where you stop? No, I'd say that's where you start, right? And then you dig in. Because my sister, one of her children were told to, basically go onto an organic diet. And I struggled with it a little bit. And she said, why are you busting my chops about this? And I said, well, do you know what it means, first of all? Right? And can you afford it, secondly? And is it really going to make a difference, and why? And she didn't have the answer to anything. I'm not picking on her, right? But I said, engage with it, right? Yeah. You figure this stuff out, because, it's important enough for a doctor to tell you. So it's important enough for you to, to begin to do the research. Where do you learn to do it? Well, I think it could be on podcasts like this, or, speaking to farmers that are farming in your local area, if that's your thing.
The hard part is sourcing that information. I think that's really where folks today are struggling, whether it's fitness information, nutrition information on food quality. There's so many different avenues of information extraction and you always have to consider, what are the biases of this information delivery? What kind of skin in the game?
The thing about this, guys, is that we have a real advantage. What is that advantage? We're from the Northeast, and what do you learn when you grow up in the Northeast? You know how to sniff out something that doesn't smell or feel right? That's just, it's built.
Are you describing common sense?
It's built in us. I'm not, Aram. Yeah. I know you're in California, so and I appreciate that you probably have a lot of viewers from California, but it's different, right? When I grew up on Long Island, and so, my mom was always talking about, oh, that guy's a fugazi, right? But you're like, you live your life just trying to make sure that you're not, that you can believe what people say, and you learn how to engage with, what you're being told. And I think that's really, that's really an important skill. My family makes fun of me. I wasn't interested in science when I was going to school. I studied business. You don't need to, I'm telling you don't need to be a scientist just to ask some basic questions.
Yeah, that's why I say curious. Like we said so much, be curious about when you're talking about nutrition, fitness, be curious, try things out, experiment with it and see. And even if you're genuinely curious, like go to multiple different farms. You might now, when you actually show up, go, oh, I see a big fucking difference. This person's saying the same thing as that, but I can clear as day see, like exactly what you said, are they willing to talk to you? How do they talk to you? What things are they willing to show you, not show you? And you might just visibly be able to see the difference by showing up to these places versus this fear of, oh, this is confusing and new. I don't want to show up and look stupid at this farm and ask questions. People who are really into this and doing things the right way are probably excited to educate you on their processes.
Well, it's a big part of our business, right? Yeah. The education part is a big part, because what we need to do is we need to move consumer behavior.
Yeah.
We have like a secret weapon, which is that inherent in every one of us, somewhere, some deeper down than others, right, is a desire to be healthy, right? Yeah. We know our brains are programmed to value nutrient-dense foods, right? Because if we get sidetracked because a of marketing and sugar. But if we could just see past the marketing and see past the allure of sugar, right, in our diets, then, we would be programmed to say that tomato tastes better because it's more nutrient dense.
It's unbelievable the difference. Like
Yeah.
my buddy who grows tomatoes and eggplants and stuff, I'm like, the first time I ever had one of his tomatoes versus something in the store, I was like, holy shit. So it's like the first time I had real salmon, not the store-bought stuff. I'm like, I'm never buying salmon from the grocery store again. The texture, the color, the flavor, everything is different.
Stephen, can you speak to this phenomenon? Because I think this is actually interesting. I have a lot of clients who will travel abroad. They'll go to Italy for a week or two. They'll go to the Philippines. They'll go to Vietnam. Yeah. I had one couple who literally went to Italy last summer. They just got back from Vietnam, and the report is always exactly the same. I went to Italy. I ate nothing but bread. I ate nothing but sweets. Drank nothing but wine. I came back lighter. I felt better. I had more energy. My mood was better. I just spent 2 weeks in Vietnam eating all the stuff that they fed us at restaurants. I had no digestive issues, no problems. Where's this coming from?
Well, Michael Pollan is a great author, right? And if this is of interest to you, then I'd suggest any of his books. He's awesome. But it really moved the needle for me. If you look at the percentage of our diet that is, wheat, corn, soy, and I'm missing one. Oh, sugar. It's some extraordinary percentage. And so where we think we have diversity in our diets, we don't. And
yeah, most people eat different shades of tan.
Yeah. Whereas,
and they throw green in every now and then.
Yeah, I think that's one. And this may not answer your question directly, but it's just something to consider relative to the question, which is, look, we're Americans. We're born and raised. We're the best country on earth. Nothing better, right? That's certain, right? We're Americans. We're certain it's always the best here. I believe that. However, what I would say is, when it comes to food and diets, maybe think a little bit harder about that, right? Yeah. The way in which foods are grown locally. The chemicals that are allowed to be used in the agricultural production process, delivery times, things like that. All that really matters, and it goes to that Western diet, right? We tend to be the envy of the rest of the world with respect to our yields and our general level of productivity when it comes to agriculture. But those countries that adopt our Western diet begin to experience the same issues that we have. And it's beyond just being obese, right? There's all sorts of things that we're learning, more and more about because of how concentrated our diet is and because of some of the ways that we're producing our food. And so it doesn't surprise me when you go overseas. It may also be because you're on vacation, you're happier, and it's just generally, but
that's a good point.
It doesn't surprise me that the quality of what you're eating, and probably the diversity, and maybe the time that you're eating the meals,
maybe just
and the
being
sequence,
slower. You're not rushed out like you are in America.
And I'd also say, and this is not my idea, much all this is a Michael Pollan idea, but it's the act of actually eating together.
Yeah.
And that's
making an experience as opposed to
it goes to health, guys. And it makes sense when you really start to think through it. And less we're eating together as a family, and more we're eating takeout and eating on the go and things like that. And it does impact not only our physical but mental health as well.
Yeah. Well, we've said
I think it'd be a big part of it.
We've said it on this podcast numerous times about the idea that, 30 years ago, people were not just arbitrarily going out to eat at anywhere the frequency that it is today. Like, it was a treat.
It was always an event.
It was a treat.
Something. Yeah.
My parents would take us out once every 3 or 4 months, and it had to be a special occasion. It had to be worth the money. It had to be worth the time. And now, with the advent of all these apps and everything else, you can get anything delivered to you. I had fucking cookies and ice cream delivered to me on Sunday.
Yeah.
We're all disgusted. Yeah. We're all disgusted with you, Aram. Stop sharing your lifestyle.
But it's just, but like, listen, I have a reasonable relationship with food and I know how to do whatever I need to do to feel and look my best. But most people don't have the skill sets or the experience that I do. So what they're going to do is they're going to be susceptible to that convenience in the most unproductive way possible, because I think you can use convenience to your advantage. Yeah. If you are in a foreign city and you don't know where the grocery store is, or if you don't know where to get food and you fly into Philly, whatever, and I've never been there, I can hop on Instacart, I can hop on Uber Eats, and I can find something that fits my requirements. But that's also understanding what are your individual requirements. What are your standards for yourself? And what are you willing to accommodate to if your options are not available to you, and understanding how to adapt and pivot. But most people don't have that skill set, unfortunately.
Yeah, it just becomes, everybody's so busy, and this becomes the last priority, unfortunately.
And perhaps the way they're increasingly so we're taught, right? Because we were taught, again, this is not me. We were taught how to cook and eat from, our grandparents, then our parents, right? And that's quickly going away. And so where are you learning how to? Where are you getting your information? Where are you learning from?
That's a great point for people with kids right now, who maybe they are the generation that's transitioned from passing on the ability to cook food and prepare things at home. And now they're raising kids that have never been a part of that or seen it. I think that's a vital lesson for people right now.
I'm seeing it daily. Like I have multiple people that I can think of off the top of my head whose parents are chronic diet eat outers, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
It's either an ordered meal. Like, let's just put it this way. If they're eating 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, at least one of those meals every single day is eaten out or ordered out. And then their kids have access to Uber Eats, and their kids are allowed to order whatever, whenever they feel like it, because it's all tied to mom and dad's credit card.
Insane. That's crazy.
I just, when my parents cooked, it was get in here and watch. Like, come in here and learn how this is done. Now, I didn't go and adopt the methods of cooking that my parents did, because Lord knows they covered everything in oil and everything had butter dripped all over it and everything was high calorie. But there's no reason why, as a 40-something-year-old adult, you don't know how to brown beef in a pan, or how to put chicken into an Instapot, or do something like as innocuous and simple as that. But we're even going away from those basics to the point where people don't even know how to boil water to make rice.
It's true. Although, maybe just to turn the direction a little bit, there are some bright spots, right? So
true.
For our business, what we see is we'll see a massive surge in buying of liver or kidney or heart.
Cool.
Dude, that was quarterly growing up.
Where did this come from? Yeah, where did this come from? And and I think, we don't know, but we suspect somewhere on
Liver
social
King.
media,
somewhere. Liver King and Carnivore MD.
Yeah.
And so you say, okay, well, where is this surge in dark meat? Yeah. Right? There's an interest in it, right? And growing up, we would only ever have chicken breasts, right? White meat. We would never have dark meat from the chicken or the turkey. But when we went to my grandmother's house, that was the first thing that they would put on their plate. And it would always be like, ooh, what they're from a different country, and their grandparents, they do things weird, but they're selecting for nutrient density, right? It's a better product for you, and you see some of that starting to come back. I have 3 children, and when my parents took us out, if we ever drove by a McDonald's, right, when I was young, we would always beg them to stop. It was the greatest thing.
Same.
Now, if let's say I exhibit a moment of weakness, and I'm well, come on, Aram, you do too. Like, if you see it at McDonald's, sometimes you'll stop and get a burger, right? And if I look back and say, guys, you want anything? No way, Dad. We would never eat. And this is interesting, right? My children never have. Well, one of them sometimes, but for the most part, never drink soda. You see some of this reconnection or return to healthier eating that I think is actually quite good. I don't know where the information is necessarily coming from, but they're not interested in fast food anymore.
That's great.
It's good for them. I want to get back to the farm and what you had told me when we were on the phone about grass-fed. What should people be looking for? What words maybe should they be looking for instead of just grass-fed? Because what does grass-fed potentially mean, and why is it not possibly as good as what they may think it is?
Okay, so this is going to send people like nuts. Perfect. So just stick with me, all right? So let's say, for instance, this is a hypothetical to any customer out there. This is a hypothetical, right? So let's say we have 3 acres of pasture, and in 5 of the acres, we plant a corn crop, right? And we just let the cattle do whatever they wanted to do. No fences, to keep them into the area. Where do you think they would head first?
Corn.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Sugar.
Yeah.
Right? And so much like us, right? So if you put a Slurpee in front of you and it's a hot day, you're going to drink Slurpee. It's not. So is it going to ruin their health profile if they spend a day, eating down that corn? No, it's not.
Dose dependent, just like we say with everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, guys. So what do you learn, right? So you learn a few things. One, actually diversity is important, right? And so that's why we seed our fields with lots of different species of grasses and legumes. People forget that grains are forages, and animals are built to eat forages. Where things break down is when is it gonna kill you if you go to McDonald's once a month? No, actually, it probably make you better, because mentally it's just gonna make you happy one day. It's not a big deal. It's not gonna ruin you.
That's the one thing that people are gonna they're gonna listen to this whole podcast and be like, you know what? I can go to McDonald's. Bunch of idiots, idiot listeners. I'm just kidding.
My sales are going right down the tube right now. But I'm giving you my honest view, right? Having seen, like, I've been in, sometimes we interseed our fields, some portion of it, with sorghum sudan, which is a seedless forage in the corn family. So it doesn't have the seed. Right? We'll be moving the herd, and all of a sudden they will just stop. We will not be able to move them until they've consumed all of that sorghum. Right? That to them is like the bee's knees. No matter what we do, we're not going to move them until they're done with that. It doesn't ruin it's not, it's a forage. It's a seedless forage. We're not against our protocols, right? We've made the cattle much, much happier. Most importantly, it's an extremely small percentage of their diet. And that's the point, right? Where we go wrong and where people get a little bit maybe too focused on things is 100% grass-fed and finished. Yes, that's important. It should be a grass-fed diet. If you're overwhelming the animal in a feedlot with a very, very, very high sugar diet every day, all day, that animal, just like us, would get sick. That's where the problems arise. But diversity in the pasture is not an issue. Now, with that all said, we don't grain our animals, right? They're 100% grass-fed and finished. Why? Because we do fall into that protocol, and we do think it's important, right? That's what we do. Would it be the worst thing in the world if they grazed for a day on seedless? No, absolutely not.
But you guys don't do that.
Well, we will interseed like a seedless sorghum, right? Okay. Which is in the corn family, but it doesn't have the seed, so it's okay. It's extremely small percentage, less than 1% of the animal's diet over the course of the year. But my point is less about what we do, more around keeping perspective.
Yeah.
Right. What's the issue with the seed, Steve?
Well, the seed gets a bad rap because of the way that feedlots feed the animals. So people immediately jump to, it's got to be 100% grass-fed and finished, right? And what they're trying to select out of their diet is feedlot cattle, where 100% of their super healthy, super strong, right? If you put that child in its bedroom and fed him McDonald's 3 times a day, and all he did was play video games in the dark, no matter what, that the child is going to deteriorate mentally, physically. It's just not going to. Think about that as the feedlot. That's an extreme case, but that's what we're doing in America. That, when we get calls and are you 100% grass-fed and finished? Yes, we are. That is the answer. That's the truth. That's the way it goes. But what the better question is was that animal ever in a feedlot? Because now back to labeling, right? Because you could be grass-fed in America, your label could say grass-fed and be finished in a feedlot on grain.
Yeah, because that's where grass-fed just means it was provided some grass.
So consumers are not wrong for reacting in such a violent way and saying it's got to be 100% grass-fed and finished, because they've been twisted in a bit of a pretzel through these labeling laws, and they're trying to select out of the animals coming from feedlots. Where if you actually just spend time out on our farm at Acabonac and see where when we move our cattle daily, sometimes twice a day, into fresh pasture, it's the most interesting thing. As a herd, they will basically walk around and scan the area, and then what they'll do is they'll go to the forage that their bodies need the most in order to self-medicate. So there may be forages, say, that are a little bit higher in selenium or potassium that they wouldn't touch 3 days ago, that they're going crazy for now, because they don't have the ability like you and I to go to the doctor or take vitamins, right? So they're selecting that first bite to fill what their need is. The second bite is the second most required bite for them, right, to keep healthy. Where it gets screwed up is when you put a bag of sugar in front of them, grain or something like that. Then all of a sudden they think, now the same thing would happen if we put like a really cool Pepsi commercial in front of them. I'm just trying to get it, like that's what tricks us too. Sure. But sugar will trick them. And after they do that, then they'll go and select that selenium and the potassium. And so it's more of a balance that's important out there in the field. And so that's why if you're going to spend the premium, labels matter, but spend more time engaging with the farmer and see what kind of forages do you. Why do you use ryegrass instead of orchard grass? Who knows, right? By the way, who knows? But after this conversation, it probably has something to do with, one, diversity, and two, sugar.
Is it even possible to get this quality meat in a store prior to, post what was it, White Oak Pastures with Whole Foods, and then Amazon bought over and got rid of them, and they don't even have like the real stuff from what I understand now. Maybe they started to bring things back, but is it even possible? Does pasture raised, if you even see that in a grocery store, mean anything?
This is a real interesting topic, because at some point scale breaks things down, right?
Yeah.
And it goes to profitability too, right? In agriculture, you do need some level of scale in order to sustain yourself. That's sustainable. There's not going to be a farm like ours unless we're profitable.
Yeah.
And so if scale is required, then there is that balance, right? And so you as a consumer need to consider, where is this farmer's trade-offs, right? Okay. Because there are going to be trade-offs. It's not going to be perfect. I'll give you a for instance. For instance, I got an email from a customer who said, I won't buy your chicken. So I said, okay, why? And he said, because you supplement the pastured chicken on pasture with grain, which is not so much of a problem. Their stomachs are not just built to eat forages, and you use that grain includes soy and corn. So I said, look, I get it. Some people are really resistant to soy. Some people are allergic. I get it. But tell me, where could I buy your chicken feed at scale that doesn't have that?
Yeah.
And if you find me one, and there'll be people out there that'll send me links to stuff now, what is the price? Because I get criticized because of the price of our chicken as it is now with soy and corn. No, it's non-GMO soy and non-GMO corn. But if it didn't, what would be the price of that feed? And if I had to go, let's say, into Nebraska to get it, what's the landed cost of that feed? And what does that do to the price? So all of a sudden, so what is the trade-off here? Right? Is it, and that's important as a consumer. I urge our consumers, the people to just keep that in mind, right? It may not be perfect, but don't let that destroy, what is a much, much better product for you.
Yeah. Well, how do you triage that too? Like, if you think about it this way, it has to be understood, where are a bulk of my calories coming from? So if we're asking our clients, or if we're asking even ourselves to eat a high protein diet, and a bulk of our meals is coming from protein, it would make sense to source our proteins to the best of our ability and the best possible quality that there is. And when it comes, I eat some type of an animal protein 4 meals a day. So if that's the case, and I'm eating a bulk of it, 7 to 9, sometimes 10 ounces of meat per sitting, then logically it would make sense that I would want that to be my highest quality. I'm going to care a little bit less about where my sweet potato and my rice is coming from. I'm probably going to care a little bit less where my tomato or my asparagus is coming from.
Yeah, you do get the organic Twinkies though, right?
Of course I do. I go to Chick-fil-A because they use sunflower oil instead of,
All right, good.
So when it comes down to, and my question that I was really curious about is the idea of there's chemicals in our food. Right. Like we have all these people on Instagram and social media and mass media on TV that are yelling about this word that's, being spread around like it's wildfire, which is toxicity. And I don't think anybody understands what toxic actually means. I don't think they understand where it's coming from, what the standard for toxicity is. So can you elaborate a little bit on that phrase or that word and what we should understand about it?
So one of the things that I think is important is where you get your information from. And it really matters, right? So it really matters. And so we'll get calls sometimes around vaccines in particular, and people will be very, very nervous. You could hear it in their voice because they've seen, report that mRNA vaccines are available for cattle. And I ask them where they saw that, and they say InfoWars. And it's more than a conversation about please just be careful where you're getting information from, right? Most of the time, that's an okay conversation to have. But sometimes there's no talking to it, and then there's nothing really you can do. Information matters. Now, why does it matter? What are young farmers being taught? Where are they being taught? Right? They're being taught from their grandfathers, their fathers, but they're also learning about this stuff in college. There are ag grants. South Carolina is probably Clemson, and Nebraska, it's University of Nebraska. And who's funding that research? Right? Who's funding what they're learning in those colleges? And that's where you need to be careful, because if you say it is not the case where there's residues of hormones, added hormones in your beef, then where did you learn that? Right? Because it matters like who funded that education. So that's just disclaimer number one. So just be careful, number one. Number two, your body probably will tell you pretty quickly, right? So I'll give you for me, when I ate a lot of steak, a lot, and at some point, Jim, probably not you, right? But for me, I started to feel horrible after I would feel like I needed to drink a gallon of water. I'd have some weird dreams. I wouldn't be able to just generally sleep. Feel just horrible after. And
it's like a night at Fogo de Chao. It's like one night at Fogo de Chao. You got that green thing showing for too much. Yeah, I'm effed up from it.
Why is that? And then so I always say how do you feel after you eat our beef? Because you can tell, your body will tell you straight away the difference, right? And that must be something. It must be the diet. And I suspect, although I don't know, because it's hard to know what research you're relying upon, right? Where it came from, where it was funded, whether or not there are any residues. What scares me, I'll tell you what scares, are the added hormones. So, I sometimes ask, do you do steroids? Right? And I'm not asking actually for an answer. I'm just asking for you to consider it, right? So there may be some people that decide to take steroids, but most of us will say, absolutely not. I never want any of that in my body. Yeah. But we're hormones, which are basic steroids, in the ears of the cattle in order for them to grow fast. Now, is there a chance that there's a residual amount of added hormones that shows up in the muscle, the protein, the steak that you're eating? Yes, I believe that.
Yeah,
I believe that. And now, if you were to ask our government, the answer is no.
No, yeah.
And so you need to do your own research, and probably the best is how you feel after.
Yeah.
If you have a young daughter and she's eating a lot of proteins and she's maturing into womanhood earlier than perhaps, should be, that's something to consider.
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me, and it doesn't bother me at all that people are highly sensitive to vaccines right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are we using vaccines in the animals that we raise?
Yeah.
And if we are using vaccines, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? And there's the trade-off, right? And this is an important one, and I talk to my customers about it, which is, what's more important, humane handling or the use of non-subtherapeutic antibiotics, right? So if an animal gets sick and we're under a no antibiotic protocol, we can't treat that animal with antibiotics. So what does that mean for the animal? And what does that mean for your label that says humane handling? Because if an animal needs help, right? If you're under a non-antibiotic protocol, what do you have to do? You have to take that animal out of the herd, which is stressful. And most probably, from an economic perspective, if people are being honest, they're going to sell that animal. They're going to sell the sick animal into a sale barn. And think about how stressful that whole event is. And think about then where that animal is going, which is a feedlot. And so how do you reconcile the two? Because you have the same protocols. You're no antibiotic and you're humane handling.
Yeah.
So what gives?
Yeah, I never even thought of it from that perspective. I think it's a great perspective shift.
This is something where this is to say our customers ask us, well, then what do you do, Steve? Thanks for all that, but now tell me, do you use antibiotics or not? When we first started, we did, because we needed to. Our soil health, our productivity of the forage, the health of the forage was not where it needed to be. We were taking over conventionally farmed land. Yeah. It takes a while, right? And so our animals, there was a year where we had a few animals that got pink eye, and we gave them time to try to heal on their own, but they didn't. And so if you have ever seen a child or an adult or a cow, right, a big aggressive animal that with pink eye, there's a lot of discomfort there. Yeah. And it's difficult for us to see. It's difficult to deal. So we treated that animal. Now, we moved past that, right? Because the situation that we have for the animals, soil health, forage quality, levels of stress being much lower or better at what we do. We worked out a lot of, our kinks over the years. We haven't had to give antibiotics. Yeah. That's where I think you want to be. Do you want to work for them, or say, I'm not going to do it, versus I don't have to do it.
We don't have to do it. Yeah, that's awesome.
I can fatten our cattle and our lambs without the use of grain. I don't have to use grain. I can put 2 pounds of gain a day on that animal. And I will get the marbling that we need in order to have people enjoy the taste and the tenderness. So I don't need grain. And that comes from regenerative. That comes from focusing on the health. That's where I think when you ask your questions to your local farmers, you want to get the answers to. Do you need to use antibiotics? Do you need to use herbicides and pesticides? Because you're not doing it for the fun of it. The stuff's expensive if you have to use it. Yeah. Do you need to purchase synthetic fertilizers? Because if the answer is no, I don't need it, then that's probably a farm you want to more engage with. Yeah. Is my sense. That's what I think.
No, I think that was awesome. That last little bit of it explained like nuance and not getting hung up on specifics and the reasons behind it. That was such, I think, a powerful moment right then with information for people to be like, oh shit, if they don't get it, listen to it again and get it.
And what a simple takeaway into being able to just apply that to yourself and yourself as a human being and what you eat. And the correlation between, well, if you're sick every single time your kid is sick, or every single season you're getting strep throat or you got the flu.
Yes, your environment matters. Yeah.
I've had a cough for a couple of weeks now, but not a cause for concern. But there's people that I know, I have clients who every other month there's something going on. And it's like, that's not normal. That is not something that you should be dealing with on a month-to-month basis.
People get antibiotics multiple times a year because they're sick. And then the downstream effect of having that many antibiotics in your system.
Steve, so give you another, my wife would disagree with this, but you really learn a lot about people by working on a farm, not because you're working with people, but by animals. I'll give you for instance, You see in the movies, you see like Yellowstone or something like that, big tough guys on horseback, a lot of hooting and hollering and probably prodding and stuff like that. What does that really do, right? That loses money. Why? Because you're putting stress on that animal.
Yep.
And just like us, if you put stress on yourself or you put stress on an animal, we get sick.
Yeah.
And so on our farm, I'm not saying this is the better way to do it. I'm just saying this is what made sense to us. We have a no loud noise, no hooting and hollering, certainly no prods. I mean, forget about that. We're not pushing our animals hard ever. If we're using stockmanship to move them quietly, softly. Why? Because we make money that way.
Yeah.
The stress load stays low. At a low stress load, the animal eats more. When the animal doesn't have stress and it eats more, it gains weight faster. When it gains weight faster, it goes to slaughter faster. And it puts more money in our pocket, right? It just makes sense. So if we are struggling with things, right, there's a root cause, right? And we should figure that out. When you work on a farm and you see these life cycles happen so fast, right? With a chicken, it's a matter of weeks. With a beef, it's under 30 months typically. You can actually see these changes and improvements, or the other way, very, very quickly based on the environment that animal is in, and in particular, the diet that the animal's consuming. You learn a lot about life.
Yeah. It's wild because when we can get people to stress less, it might actually help them lose weight, where when the animals are stressed less, they can help gain weight. Well, either way, it's a benefit.
but if you rewind the clock 100 years before the advent of processed foods and before all that stuff, when a human being was stressed, what did they do? They didn't eat.
Yeah,
most people didn't stress. Stress eating was not a thing until hyper palatable foods became an advent. So now we use food as comfort because it's highly tasty and it takes our mind and it allows us to release that dopamine to stop worrying about our problem momentarily and put a Band-Aid on it. We didn't have that option 100 years ago. So people didn't stress eat. They did other shit to cope with their problems. So it makes total sense. Yeah. Or they would go cheat on their wives or go spend money. And that was the more organic way of doing things.
Organic.
I think for all these reasons and many others, it's important that local farms not only continue to exist because it's tough going, right? But we figure out a way to allow them to thrive. Why? Because some of these benefits that we talked about, but when we humans can reconnect with agriculture, and I get that there are a lot of people out there that don't eat meat and they're very against slaughter. I understand that. I spent an hour or two today responding to Facebook comments about some of this stuff.
You got to get that social media person to respond for you,
No,
maybe that's the wife's job, or like you can pay your kids to do it, and then you can write off that expense.
I actually, I honestly, I do have some sympathy. If you listen to my discussion, I hopefully it won't happen on this podcast, but I do get choked up when I talk about it's the worst part, right? We do grow very much connected to maybe not the chickens, but the other ones. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not pleasant. And you could say, well, why do you do it? And I get that too. I think about that sometimes as well. But that reconnecting with the food source and what goes into putting that steak on your plate, you may conclude that smaller portions, higher quality, right? You may actually begin to see what drives things like water quality, what drives environmental health, what drives diversity in species of forages, as well as other animals, fox and eagles and all sorts of things that return to healthy environments. We don't have that anymore. We certainly don't have it on Long Island. I know you guys have it more in Jersey and certainly out west. But in urban areas, we don't have it. It's really missing. It's important.
And I think that brings back the conversation earlier of eating slower, eating with family. It's all connected. When you do start this process, it's like you become more grateful for the meal. It's like people back in the day, they probably meant their prayers for their meal way more because they maybe saw the value in it. And now everything's such easy access. It's like, are you just going through the motions of being grateful? Or are you genuinely grateful? And I think when you do reconnect with the sourcing of all this stuff, it can make you much more grateful.
And I also think healthier. Yeah. I think you will make better decisions around your
all
diet.
Connected. Absolutely. It's all connected. If there's, because we're coming to an end here, are there any resources that, because I know like eatwild.com people can go to find maybe local farms. Do you have any other resources outside of that and Google?
There's almost no excuse, guys. So if you want, like you can get it, you can get our food the next day almost to your house. We're almost as good as Prime type of thing. And we're not unique. So across the US, there's in California, I admire a farm called Five Marys
I've heard of them. Yeah.
And in the middle of our country, there's a great farm called Seven Sons.
Yep.
I'd like to think that there's a number of fantastic farms down in the South. There's a White Oak. I think that you mentioned something earlier. I'm not familiar with that, but I think what they stand for is fantastic. In the Northeast, increasingly so. I mean, who would have thought that, one of the biggest producers of grass-fed and finished beef in the Northeast is now on Long Island.
It's awesome.
Now that's a little bit of a trick because there's not many cattle in the Northeast, but with that, even less grass-fed and finished.
It's like getting third. It's like getting second place in a jiu-jitsu tournament. There's only 2 people there.
But you might as well use it if you got it. But the point is that as we farmers learn to improve our margins by going direct to consumers and by getting the costs out, the chemicals and the other issues that we talked about, we can be more profitable and we can come closer to succeeding.
Yeah. Well, your website's definitely going to be in the show notes here. And there are a lot of listeners from this area between either just from him originally being from the Northeast, me being from here, a lot of listeners in the Jersey, New York, Connecticut area. So I think it'll be exciting for them to feel good about maybe being able to order something from you. And is there anything that you'd want to offer anybody listening here with like a first order kind of a thing?
Yeah, if you go to the site, there'll be if it's your first order, so long as you give us I think your email, and you can opt out of it if you don't. It's 15% off your first order,
awesome.
And
nice.
We'll ship it to you for the minimum order of $125, free shipping of $175. But to Jersey and Connecticut and New York, it's even if you're below $175, it's very, very cheap to send.
Nice, that's awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to? People that listen love the book recommendations. What Michael Pollan book do you recommend to get them started?
I mean, Omnivore's Dilemma. That's the one, right? That's the one that'll kick it off for you. And then In Defensive Food is the next one after that I would recommend. And then they get a little bit more far out after that. But those
his fungus adventures.
Yeah, which I kind of
which is great. I love it.
Yeah.
I love that his whole experience and discussions on those things.
Mm-hmm.
But because again, it all goes back to that connection to the earth. When he gets into that, it's fantastic. Ron, though, I think I cut you off. I asked you if there was anything else you wanted to ask him.
No, I mean, I think this was great. He covered all the bases I would have wanted to hear. And at the end of the day, it's always going to come back to the same discussion of keep it simple. Don't try to find the boogie monster if it doesn't exist. And as long as you're trying to be an advocate for yourself and you're using some logic and some common sense, you'll probably find a pretty reasonable path.
I think this becomes such an intimidating topic that people then don't investigate and they just keep the status quo. Yeah. The amount of times, well, where do you get your meat from? And it's like, they'll just take your recommendation kind of a thing. But for now, for people who do want to, because I think there's a huge value, especially if anybody has any fear of the government, like turning off electricity or shutting off transportation or any of the things that we experienced with COVID, get to know your local farmer now, because they're going to take care of their real customers before they start taking care of people that just show up all of a sudden when you can't get stuff shipped to your house anymore. So even from that perspective, people have that fear, get to know them. And so Stephen, we really appreciate you coming on. I love the fact that this is just we love when we get anything a little bit different than the normal, other coach kind of a conversation. I love it. So I appreciate everything that you provided to us and to anybody listening today.
No, thank you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and be a part of your program. And I enjoyed it.
Absolutely, man. Our last question that we ask every guest. Peace out.